These are very sophisticated, expensive weapons, which are Ukraine's pretty much only defense against ballistic missiles. There is a European system, SAMP-T, which technically can also do that job, but the Patriot is far superior in practice.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now today, on day 1239 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation, brackets full-scale war against Ukraine, we're very privileged to be talking to Jimmy Rushton. Now Jimmy is a Kyiv-based foreign policy and security analyst currently focused on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is why he's in Kyiv today. Jimmy, welcome to Frontline.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you on. Now, just before Donald Trump made his statement last night, Putin's representative, Kirill Dmitriev, was calling for constructive dialogue between Moscow and Washington. He wrote that talks would be more useful than pressure rhetoric, which is clearly what he was anticipating from Trump, and even decorated his social media messages with peace-themed emojis. Do you think that was a symbol that Putin might be slightly worried about what Trump was going to say?
I think so. And Dmitriev is doing what he always does. He's pretending to be this very civilized technocrat, which, previously he mingled with the financial elites in the West. As you said, he runs the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund. But he's also a member of the SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. And he's doing exactly what his profession would do in this situation. He's trying to influence the Americans. I think they are worried, especially, they're definitely worried about significant amounts of sophisticated American weaponry arriving in Ukraine again, for sure.
Yeah, no, we had then Donald Trump coming out with that statement and in his meeting with Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO. He promised, the one thing he emphasized was he promised more Patriot batteries very quickly. Which I think is good. He mentioned 17 within days. He had a smile on his face when he talked about weapon supply and sophisticated weapon supply through European members of NATO. So European members of NATO would buy them from the United States and then supply them to Ukraine. And he encouraged them to use their current stocks to supply weapons quickly. And then he could replenish them. And then went on to talk about tariffs against Russia and those that are buying oil and gas and other goods from Russia if Putin doesn't come to the negotiating table within 50 days. Do you think China and India are going to be in a position, because they buy most of the oil and gas, to actually put proper pressure on Putin? Do you think Putin will listen? And what are the Ukrainians thinking about this seemingly change of heart that seems to come from Donald Trump?
Well, speaking to Ukrainian friends, they're very happy about the prospect of more weapons arriving in Ukraine, especially the Patriot PAC-3 anti-ballistic missile interceptors, because these are very sophisticated, expensive weapons, which are Ukraine's pretty much only defense against ballistic missiles. There is a European system, SAMP-T, which technically can also do that job, but the Patriot is far superior in practice. So for Ukraine, the fact that they're going to be getting more of these Patriot batteries and these Patriot interceptors is a massive thing. It's a massively welcome. In regards to India and China, look, I don't really want to predict what Trump's going to do, because he's very mercurial and he changes his mind seemingly on a dime. I would say that any pressure that can be put on Moscow is welcome. I do wonder how these secondary sanctions would work, because we've seen, Washington has not gone along with several G7 proposals to increase sanctions on Russia's dark fleet, which is these fleet of oil tankers which ferry Russian oil around the world. They refused to go along with a proposal to lower the price cap, which is the agreed upon figure that people can buy Russian oil for. So, it's slightly contradictory. I would think that firstly, if they are serious about, increasing economic pressure on Moscow, agreeing to these steps that America's allies had already proposed would be a good first step. So, yeah, secondary sanctions, I'm not too sure about how practical and how effective they would be.
Do you think Putin and his team are sitting there going, phew, we've got 50 days to come up with a plan to try and play Donald Trump again and get him to elongate the deadline or to forget about this sanctions bit, and therefore that's almost a win for them.
Maybe. I think, they're definitely not going to be happy about the fact that significant amounts of weaponry is going to arrive in Ukraine. And really, if you look at some sources connected to the Russian Air Force, they were talking about how Ukraine had significantly dwindling supplies of air defense interceptors, and they were saying that the Russian Air Force was enjoying far more latitude to operate in previously denied airspace to them. And obviously, that would be incredibly bad news for Ukraine if the Russian Air Force was able to operate over Ukrainian-controlled territory. So I think from that perspective, anything that boosts Ukraine's air defense, anything that gets more artillery, more GMLRS, and other sophisticated weaponry that really only the US can supply is a massive thing. And for the Ukrainians, that will be what they'll be focusing on. And the Russians definitely won't be happy about that.
Ukraine is suffering and has suffered where weapons haven't been supplied on time. But the Russians themselves seem to be suffering a bit because North Korea, they're relying on North Korea for a lot of its shells. 12 million shells supplied by North Korea, according to South Korea's military intelligence. Pyongyang said that they'd shipped 28,000 containers packed with weapons and ammunition to Russia. Vladimir Putin keeps saying, I can sustain this operation, but it's quite clear if he's relying on North Korean kit. I wouldn't, as a military person, want to stand beside a gun where I put a North Korean shell in it and pull the lanyard, because I would expect it to explode in the breech, not necessarily leave the barrel. What does this say about Russia's ability to sustain the war? And how do the Ukrainians feel about this on the front line? Do they feel, with everything that's going on, generally supported or let down, or does it wax and wane depending on what's coming out from Washington?
So to answer your last question first, it very much depends on what the kind of mood in the White House at any one point is. Obviously, when there was that massive blow up with Zelensky, they felt very betrayed. But I would say Ukrainian views on Trump have moderated slightly. I think, once again, if we start seeing significant quantities of US provided weapons flowing into Ukraine, their opinion of him will increase. Also, there was that interesting Financial Times article that was released earlier today, which said that Trump had told Zelensky in a phone call that he should bomb St. Petersburg and Moscow. That's creating some interesting kind of views on Ukrainian social media. Ukrainians are slightly puzzled because they don't really know what to make of it. But if that's a continuing kind of line that Trump becomes more bullish on Ukrainian strikes inside Russia, then again his stock will increase amongst Ukrainians. In regards to North Korean ammunition, so you're right, it's not particularly great quality, but it generally goes in the right direction. What I would say is that this war is very much not about artillery now. I'm speaking to people on the front. They told me, this was in 3rd Assault Brigade, they told me roughly 70% of their casualties and Russian casualties are caused by drones. Drones are significantly more effective than artillery. Artillery has really been used as a suppression weapon at this point, with the notable exception of cluster munition artillery, the DPICM, which the Americans have supplied, which is very effective. But traditional artillery, because Russia is using small group tactics, they're using small groups of assault troops, 3, 4, 5, 6. So traditional artillery doesn't really work against them. You need to fire a lot of rounds of conventional 155 millimeter artillery in order to have a good effect on those targets.
Well, that lack of concentration of troops. But you mentioned drones. How over the last couple of years have you seen the dynamics of the battlefield change? Drones clearly are having a massive impact and changing things. Russians are adapting their tactics all of the time, but they're straight into meat grinder tactics. What are your observations from the front line?
It's completely changed, and it changes every 6 months. But looking back at, say, 2-3 years ago, when drones were present on the battlefield, but they weren't the threat that they are today. Now, so there's like a 15-kilometer zone from zero line to into the rear, where everything is observed, and this goes for both sides. Everything is observed by a drone, and once your movement is observed heading towards the zero line, you will inevitably attract a swarm of first-person view strike drones or bomber drones from the opposite side. They will punish any movement. They punish any attempt to do logistics, any attempt to do casualty evacuations. So essentially, getting to and from position now is the most dangerous thing the soldiers can do. And they have to do it on foot because they can't do it with armored vehicles or other vehicles, because if they do, those vehicles will be detected and they'll be hit by drones. Logistics is increasingly carried out by drones. So unmanned drones on the ground, unmanned drones in the air. When I was with 3rd Assault Brigade's Unmanned Systems Battalion, and they were showing me video of a very big kind of converted agri drone, which had 6 propellers and could carry 40 kilos, something like that. And this was taking supplies to one of their positions on the front line. It flew to the position, dropped the supplies, flew back. And yeah, they do it with ground drones as well. These little, essentially like upscaled remote control cars that have, a cargo bed, and they put supplies in them and they drive it to the front line. So they're smaller than vehicles. And if they do get detected, they do get attacked, you've lost a drone, but you haven't lost people. So the impact of drones on the front line on this war is immeasurable. And it's a new way of fighting war that nobody in the West is prepared for, and that nobody in the West really has any idea of how to fight with drones or to fight against drones.
Yeah, it's fascinating. As the drone technology is increasing, are you seeing a similar growth in counter drone technology?
No. So there are electronic warfare systems that can counter drones, but very much the drone is in the ascendant. Some of the new drones that they're using now, both sides, that are controlled by fiber optic. So firstly, they are unjammable because there's no signals going to and from the drone. They're undetectable, so because there's no signals, you can't have a drone detector device which kind of lights up when it detects the frequency of an incoming drone. They can also conduct quite sophisticated ambush tactics. You can land a fiber optic drone. It doesn't require that much power. It can basically go to sleep for quite a while. Then when you detect a target approaching, you can just reactivate it, take off, and then strike that target. So they are, they're very difficult to counter. Even the, radio controlled ones, electronic warfare is very hit and miss. A lot of electronic warfare just doesn't really work, or if it works, it doesn't give as much protection as you would need. A skilled drone pilot can attack a vehicle protected by electronic warfare relatively easily if they know what they're doing. I'm not going to go into specific tactics that they would use, but it's not that difficult. So what I saw when I was with 3rd Assault is that they are training lots of their guys to use shotguns now. I was at a firing range, and they had a guy with a Remington pump action shotgun, and they had just like a clay pigeon shooter set up, and they were flinging clays at this guy, and he was knocking them out of the sky with his shotgun. So that is something that, for a last ditch defense, actually works. And you're seeing increasing numbers of shotguns being deployed by both sides now.
Yeah, well, yeah, skeet shooting. We'll see the underslung barrel on assault weapons now becoming a pump action shotgun potentially for last minute drone defense at the end. But the other thing that I've seen is you did a fantastic interview with a Ukrainian soldier who had been was suffering from the after effects of chemical weapons that the Russians had been dropping on his position. And it seems that there are increasing reports of the Russians dropping banned chemical weapons. Now, these are irritants designed to flush the Ukrainians out of their defensive positions into the open so that they can be attacked either by artillery or by drones. Can you give us an understanding for how prolific this is? What is it that you picked up talking to them, and what is it that Ukraine can do to defend against it?
Yeah, so I first covered this story back in 2024 for the Telegraph, and I did an investigation which included recovering Russian chemical weapon from the front line, which was a CS gas grenade. Now, you're right; they do generally use either irritants or incapacitants. The two major agents that they use is CS gas, which is classed as a riot control agent, but is banned under the Chemical Weapon Convention to be used in wartime. They also use chloropicrine, which is an incapacitant. Now, it's far too lethal to be used as a riot control agent. Nobody uses it as a riot control agent. It will absolutely kill you if you stay in a confined space and it fills with chloropicrine. You will almost certainly die. There are other agents that I've heard that have been used, although I haven't been able to confirm this. I will also add that both the Dutch, the Danish, and the US governments have confirmed that they've used chloropicrine in recent intelligence assessment.
Yeah, I've seen those reports and talked to chemical weapons experts about them. So that's the particularly worrying one, because, as you say, it's supposed to be less than lethal, but it's lethal in the concentrations if you don't evacuate from the areas very quickly.
So chloropicrine is not a riot control agent. I think this distinction needs to be made. CS, you're absolutely right. It is less lethal. It's a riot control agent. It's used by police forces all around the world, including in Northern Ireland. Although not on the mainland in the UK, funny enough. But chloropicrine is not. Chloropicrine is classed as an incapacitant, and it's a choking agent as well. And it's incredibly nasty. It will cause long-term lung damage. This is not a chemical that would ever be used for riot control purposes. So I've heard a lot of people saying, "Oh, they're just using tear gas." That's not true. I've also heard credible reports, that they've used Lewisite. I've heard credible reports. This is from an intelligence interceptor, that they're using phosgene in small quantities. I've heard credible reports that they are using something which caused, and I'm directly quoting my source in the Ukrainian military, it caused death in a very short period, and the victims of this particular agent had pinpoint pupils, which is something you would recognize as one of the main symptoms of being exposed to a organophosphate nerve agent. So, but to be clear, this is not something I can, definitively say has happened, but that the event happened, but I can't say that it was definitively that agent that was used. But it's the most important thing is that this is a systematic campaign. Everyone that I've spoken to either has been gassed themselves or has one of their comrades in arms that's been gassed. So it's systematic. It's clearly been ordered from the Russian military hierarchy, and it's effective, unfortunately. That's the reason why they do it. It's because it's effective at driving Ukrainian soldiers out of their foxholes and then killing them with other weapons.
Well, for those that are watching, just so that they know, chloropicrine was one of the first, if not the first, chemical weapon that the Germans used during the First World War to good effect. And you've mentioned Lewisite and phosgene; those are other weapons that were used there. But chloropicrine was used to good effect during the First World War. We've seen the change of the tactics in the front line. We've seen chemical weapons being used there, but the front line is not just that 15 kilometers that you're talking about. It's across the whole of the country that we're seeing at the moment, with the nightly drone, cruise missile, and rocket attacks that are coming from the Russians. Are they having the effect on the morale of the Ukrainian people in the way that Putin is hoping that they do, or are they having the opposite effect?
No, they're not having the effect that he would hope. He clearly wants Ukrainians to be intimidated by these attacks, to be cowed by these attacks, to put pressure on the Ukrainian government to come to some form of political agreement with Russia. But that's not happening. And historically, we've seen that this sort of terror bombing, which is what it is, it's terror bombing, just doesn't work. And if anything, it instills a sense of belligerence and hostility in the people that are being bombed. Because unsurprisingly, when you bomb someone, they're generally kind of a little bit pissed off at the people that are bombing them. So, yeah, no, it's not working. But it is a big problem just because it's very disruptive. Particularly these Iranian Russian Shahid drones, which they're very cheap. They're quite destructive. They're not nearly as destructive as a cruise missile or a ballistic missile, but they still do enough damage, and they're being produced in huge numbers. So for Ukraine, the solution is, or at least the attempted solution is these FPV interceptor drones, which they hope that they can, produce at scale that would hopefully deal with these. But it's a difficult problem for them, and they haven't found a solution just yet.
Yes, anti-drone drones is coming in, but whilst the Russians seem to target civilian infrastructure, and no matter how unsophisticated these Shahed 136 drones are, their targeting isn't that unsophisticated. It should be quite accurate, and that's why it's almost certain the Russians are deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure. But again, the Ukrainians are having some success with their long-range drones attacking into Russia, and attacking. And this is the conflict going on up to in traditional military planning terms, because I was a military planner, at the operational level, where you're attacking the wherewithal of the Russians' ability to continue to sustain and prosecute and support frontline conflict. How much is that known about across Ukraine? Do the Ukrainian people feel a sense of uplift in their morale when they see the attacks going in? And do you think it is actually having an impact on Russia's ability to support its frontline operations?
It's definitely having an impact. How big that impact is difficult to exactly quantify, but we've seen multiple cases of extremely successful Ukrainian drone strikes. We've seen drone strikes on Russian arsenals, incredibly spectacular explosions, as you might expect when a munitions dump goes up in flames. Multiple cases of that. We've seen strikes on oil refineries. We've seen strikes on airfields. Very recently, there was a strike on an airfield. I believe it was in Rostov-on-Don, and destroyed 2 Su-34s, I believe. We've seen, obviously, there was this very creative Ukrainian strike, Operation Spider's Web, which destroyed 12 to 13, 14 strategic bombers. So it is having an effect. For the Ukrainians, absolutely, it raises civilian morale when pictures and videos emerge of a strike on Russian targets, and everyone in Ukrainian social media is just cheering and they're happy, and because essentially what you're seeing is the weapons that Russia fires directly at you or directly at your city going up in flames, and obviously that's going to boost people's morale. It's like Brits cheering a Spitfire shooting down a German bomber at the height of the Blitz. It's that kind of cathartic sense that the Ukrainians get when they see this happening.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Operation Spider's Web was one of the most audacious operations that I'd come across, and I have to smile when I was look back at the interview or the debate between the debate between Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office, where Zelensky was ambushed and Trump turned around and said, "You don't have any cards to play," and re-emphasized that. And Zelensky must have been sitting there going, "Yes, I do. In fact, I've got 5 aces up my sleeve, and I'm just about to play them, Mr. President, but I can't tell you about it because I don't trust you." A fantastic operation. But at the same time as the audacious drone attacks, we're seeing other commando raids and raids led by the SBU or the HUR, attacking Russian Defense Industrial Base, assassinating generals in Moscow, and bringing the war to the average Russian where it can't be hidden from them. Do you think that is having an effect? And do you think this is the tactic that needs to be expanded rather than trying to attack through the front line?
I think you need both. Obviously, you have to hold the front. And I don't think, unfortunately, the Russian population is going to be persuaded to not back this war. I think Russian society it's fragmented. Russian society is also the propaganda machine that Putin has in place is incredibly powerful. He could, and funnily enough, this is why people, when they say, "Oh no, Putin can't afford to stop this war, he'd be out of power," I completely disagree with that. I think Putin could withdraw the Russian army tomorrow, and he could tell the Russian people that they've won a fantastic historic victory, and they probably believe him, or enough would believe him that he would, not face any serious threat to his power. But I do think, bringing the war to Russian, infrastructure, military industrial complex, airfields, assassinating top generals is absolutely the right way to go, because you firstly you want to force Russia to devote resources to protecting its deep rear. You want to force them to think that nobody can be trusted. You want to kind of increase that sense of paranoia that is in some circles in Russia at this point, because they are worried about Ukrainian infiltrators. And on a practical basis, like, you just need to destroy some of the assets that Russia is using to hit Ukraine, and we saw that with Spider's Web. We saw that with these attacks on oil depots and various acts of sabotage that have been carried around. And here's the thing: Ukraine is actually very, very good at operating within Russia because Ukrainians speak Russian fluently. They have been immersed in Russian culture, not willingly, but just because of that's how this dominant culture, which has attempted to suppress their own native culture, has operated. So they make very, very good, agents work inside Russia. And it doesn't really work that well in reverse, right? Most Russians can't speak Ukrainian, and they don't really have that knowledge of Ukrainian culture, so they find it far more difficult to operate inside Ukraine.
So come on, you're going to come with me, and we're going to sit down with Donald Trump and the rest of the NATO leaders and Mark Rutte as well, and come up with the ideas as to how we help Ukraine win this. What do the Ukrainians really need? How do we properly influence Putin, and how do we bring this horrible conflict to a swift conclusion with the right outcome?
So I think the only way you influence Putin is by making him believe that it's in Russia's interest to enter some sort of peace diplomatic process than it is to continue to fight. At the moment, he still believes that he can gain more on the battlefield than he can by coming to terms. I think the way you do that is, so I think there's multiple answers to that question. So firstly, you need to increase pressure on the Russian economy. That's with sanctions, that's with price caps on oil, etc. You need to increasingly support the Ukrainian military, both with material, but also with training. So one of the big issues that I identified when I was speaking to some Ukrainian troops is that there are some brigades, again, like 3rd Assault Brigade, like Azov, like 93rd, etc., the good brigades that do training really, really well. But for a lot of brigades, when they get newly mobilized recruits, they aren't trained particularly well, unfortunately. So I think investing in this new formation of the Ukrainian army, because they are going through major reforms at this moment. One of the reasons why I was at the front is because 3rd Assault Brigade are becoming a corps there, and the Ukrainian military is moving from a brigade-based system to a corps-based system. That's in order to try and solve some of the command and control issues that they've had, which have been the source of multiple disasters, unfortunately, since 2022. This fragmented command and control, where you have brigades that just don't talk to each other. They're fighting alongside the front line. They just don't talk, unfortunately. So supporting good brigades that do good training, that fight effectively via foreign military assistance. Supporting Ukrainian domestic weapons production is important because you can build weapons in Ukraine relatively cheaply compared to how you can, how you build weapons outside of Ukraine, simply because energy cost is cheaper, labor cost is cheaper. And yeah, I think it's that multi-pronged approach. And if we do all of these things, I think Ukraine has a very good chance of winning this war. I know some people are still a little bit pessimistic, but from my perspective, understanding the Ukrainian kind of will to resist and the defiant nature of Ukrainian people, I don't think there's any chance of them definitively losing. But I think obviously the most important thing is we get Ukraine out of this war with as much territory and as many people alive as possible.
Yeah, well, Vladimir Putin has lost his strategic goals already. He's failed to topple the Zelensky government. He's failed to turn Ukraine into a puppet state like Belarus. He's failed to stop NATO expansion. And therefore, he's going for his secondary objectives, and he's failing to achieve those. So I have to agree with you. I think Ukraine can win this with the right level of support. But do you think that there's a danger if the West doesn't back Ukraine to the hilt to win this and win it by regaining territory back again, that this could lead to a wider European war, and that could potentially, with what's going on in the Middle East and Chinese tensions in Southeast Asia, lead to a wider global conflict?
I think there's definitely a danger that there could be a wider European war, quite simply because if you look at what the Russians are saying in regards to the Baltic states particularly, and their kind of revisionist view of what they view this European order should be, and how they've been, slighted by the fall of the Soviet Union. Putin famously called it one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century. They genuinely think that they should have a either control totally or have a controlling interest in these countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire. So I genuinely think there is a danger that if they are allowed to win in Ukraine, or they're allowed to, get a significant amount of territory through the use of arms, they will try again, and they'll try again in one of the Baltic states. They'll try again potentially Moldova, Transnistria, potentially take more of Georgia. And I think the principle that you cannot expand your borders through the use of military force is something that we should defend, because going back to a world where countries, essentially the most powerful countries, just expand and kind of gobble up smaller countries, is not a world we want to live in. And that's the sort of world we thought we'd left behind after 1945. And you can make whatever criticisms you want of US and UK foreign policy, but the US and the UK, when we say invaded Iraq and toppled Saddam, we didn't annex Iraq, right? I mean, there were lots of mistakes that led up to that, and there were mistakes in execution. There was mistakes at pretty much every level. But what we didn't do is we didn't say, okay, now Iraq is ours. And I think that's the difference. And I think if we live in that world, it's very dangerous for everyone. It's not just dangerous for Europeans. It's dangerous for people in Africa. It's dangerous for people in South America, because again, powerful countries will feel that they have carte blanche to do whatever they want, and nobody's going to stop them.
Yeah, well, the biggest danger is Xi Jinping may see that as a green light to go for Taiwan. But Jimmy, I think have covered an awful lot of ground there. So thank you very much indeed for talking to me today on Times Radio Frontline.
Thank you for having me.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.